Good morning, Pelham Road. Happy Tuesday to you. This morning, our time together is brought to you by our Instagram account. Head over and check out some of the photos at Instagram. The Instagram followers are growing at a smaller rate than I'd like, but it is growing. But I ask you to go over there and check us out, and if you think you could use some of that inspiration in your life, then go ahead and enlist and start following us on Instagram. Well, yesterday's was a long devotion, and this is part 2 of that devotion, and I realized it was longer, and I'm sorry about that, but this one should wrap that up, okay? At least for now. In April of 1963, Martin Luther King wrote this letter from the Birmingham jail to concerned white clergy. In it, Dr. King writes to us white moderates. I suspect moderate was the best word at his disposal at the time. I mean, conservative would be reserved for those who would desire the status quo. And these clergy certainly wanted to see change, so they really weren't conservative. And neither were these clergy marching in the streets or riding with the Freedom Riders, so they really weren't liberals like, say, James Rebb, a white clergyman who was killed in Selma. A moderate is as bad as it sounds. It's a word lacking any depth, really. William Buckley was conservative, James Cone was liberal, and these are proud, defendable positions with depth and richness. Moderate does not have such a swagger. The middle position has always sort of lacked respect, even as those who hold it try to justify their position with pragmatic sayings, like the fabric of time is held together by those who move slowly, not moving hastily and recklessly, neither standing still, but moving slowly. The moderates refuse to break things apart. I mean, that's a nice sentiment. I mean, I wrote it and have practiced it for a long time. But I don't know if it's the truth or if it's just justification for moving slowly. But this is what was in the letter from Dr. King. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods or direct action, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Well, I got to take a drink after that. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. The movement needed and needs allies. And an ally is someone who is not the focus of the issue. They are not really a stakeholder, but they stand with the stakeholders. Now, don't be confused. An ally is really not conservative or moderate or liberal. It's not on that axis. Ally is on a completely different axis. An axis that only has really 2 points, ally or opponent. These critics of Dr. King saw themselves more likely as silent, prayerful supporters, and he saw them as stumbling blocks. But on this new axis, this group of people were actually opponents because they weren't in the corner. People of goodwill, but not allies. I mean, they didn't burn crosses or blow up church. It is likely that they prayed for Dennis McNair, one of the little girls killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. An ally, however, is actually a doer. An ally could never be confused with an opponent or a goodwiller. What Dr. King was needing was not simply women and men who would stand with their African American brothers and sisters. Dr. King was calling for people to stand with God. Being neighborly, well, that can be compromised. But being faithful to God, well, that's a little harder to compromise off of. And this is a story I heard as a preacher from another preacher, so I'm sure it's not true. What I mean to say is, I'm sure that it is absolutely true, but the facts may be inaccurate. The name has been lost in time, the person who is the subject of this story, but it could have been Fred Shuttlesworth or Joseph Lowry or any African-American preacher of the 60s. They received an invitation to come to Chicago and speak at a prestigious university, and friends and supporters of the civil rights movement. The type of folks who would rarely actually hear a preacher, unless it was a funeral or a wedding in those days. And finally, the time came for the message to be delivered, and the expectation was that the preacher would go to the pulpit and call for social justice and equality. And he wouldn't do it in the timid voice of an academician, but in the thunderous words of a prophet. And the preacher stepped to the pulpit, and this is what he said. The question for this moment in history is this: what does this water mean to you? And then he gestured to the baptismal font. If you've been through this water, then it means you have already chosen sides in this cosmic battle for justice and equality. For after you have been freed, you can only wish on others freedom and liberty itself. No one born again in Christ would do unloving, not to mention unspeakable, things to others, for they will know we are Christians by our love. However, if you have not been in this water, I can see how you remain bitter and hateful. But God has not forgotten you. There is a time yet to be renewed. Let me baptize you. For once you and I are brother and sister, we can no longer be enemies. This water not only makes you whole, it makes us kin. The question is for us is really simple. Will we live into our baptism? Or will we be baptized by our culture? If baptism means anything, we must stand with God. We have already chosen a side in this battle for justice and be an ally to our African American brothers and sisters. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.